This week on BSDNow, it's getting close to Christmas and the presents seem to be dropping early. We have a new DragonflyBSD release, we got loads of news, and an exciting interview with NetBSD developer Paul Goyette coming your way right now. BSDNow, episode 119, There Be Dragons, BSD Dragons anyway, recorded December 9th, 2015. Hey, I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Alan Jude.
Glad to have you guys with us this week. We got an exciting show. There's a lot of news. We got releases, we got tutorials. Of course, we'll have an interview for you later, so you'll need to stick around for all that. And we got something really cool in the feedback section you got to see. I don't know, Alan, if you saw it. You have a picture somebody sent
amazing.
In. Yes. We all want one of those. But anyway, we'll tease you a little, and then you'll have to wait till the very end to find out, because, of course, we saved that for the last feedback item. So, stick around. You'll want to see it. But, of course, we need to get into your headlines right away. So, first up, we have some hackathon reports, it looks like, from the OpenBSD community here at the N2K15 hackathon that just took place. So, walk us through a little bit of what was going on this time around.
So Teju was working on a bunch of stuff. He has interesting comments here. He says, I don't usually get too involved with the network stack, but sometimes you find yourself at a networking hackathon and have to go with the flow. With many developers working in the same area, it can be hard to find an appropriate project. But fortunately, there are a few dusty corners in networking land that I can sweep up without too much disturbance to others. So then he starts talking about some of the stuff he managed to pull out of OpenBSD. So he says that, IPv6 is the future of networking. IPv6 has also been the future of networking for 20 years now.
Has it been that long?
As a result, the number of features that have been proposed, implemented, and subsequently obsoleted and the corresponding code never gets deleted. So, the IPsec stack has a similar trajectory, in fact. But basically, he read through various networking headers in search of features that would normally be exposed to userland, but were instead guarded by ifdef_kernel. This identifies a number of options for, set sockopt that had been officially retired from the API, but the kernel code was retained to provide ABI compatibility during the transition period so that your binaries wouldn't stop working. But, that compatibility period is now, it's been 10 years.
Sure. So you're saying my IPv6, which I still can't even get from my ISP, is already obsolete, and they're having to yank stuff
certain
out?
Features of it.
All right.
Binary programs that are old enough to need that compatibility don't run for lots of other reasons now, and so it's safe to pull that support out of the kernel. It says it's only a small improvement, but it gradually reduces the amount of code that needs to be reviewed when making larger, more important changes later, especially if they're working on, say, MPifying the networking stack or whatever, right? The less code that's...
Sure. Less you have to hack on or worry about.
Also, ifconfig on OpenBSD has a txpower subcommand to define how much transmit power you want to use on your wireless card. Although it only works with the WI driver, which was good at the time, but nobody uses that anymore, right? It's for the old... All the newer drivers don't implement that. So when you try to do it, you get an error that's not implemented. Or worse, some of the drivers silently accept the command, but don't actually change the transmit power. So you think you're changing it, and you're actually not doing anything.
That was nothing.
So he ripped that out of ifconfig. And then he found a really interesting one. Support for Ethernet trailers. So RFC 893 enables zero-copy networking on a VAX, which has 512-byte hardware pages. So this basically, I think, pads out the Ethernet frame to make it fit or whatever. It turns out the feature was removed from Ethernet or whatever before OpenBSD was even founded. But the ifconfig options for controlling it are still built into ifconfig and OpenBSD to this day. In fact, I think all it does is give you a warning that doesn't work in OpenBSD or something. So he got around to removing that. He also worked on Rebound, which is It's a simple DNS proxy meant to resolve some of the issues that occur with the current design of having every program directly query the network itself. So I don't know that much about it, but it seems it's kind of like Casper for FreeBSD, where when you capsule-commit a program, all of a sudden it can't open a socket to do a DNS lookup. I think they're trying to solve the same problem with their tame API. Is that if we don't allow this, we need to be able to, basically we say you're allowed to talk to Rebound, which will then decide if you're allowed to do a DNS query or whatever. But there were some problems with it. He thinks it's about near completion, but there are always more edge cases that need to be handled. Specifically, for example, when you don't have a network connection, when you use the old-fashioned libc resolver, it immediately fails because when it tries to do send to the DNS server, the syscall will return an error. But when using the localhost proxy like Rebound, the call will succeed and Rebound will then experience its error, right? So you send it to Rebound, and then when Rebound tries to use the network, it fails. But when he initially created Rebound, he treated all the errors as transient, right? Just try again and maybe it'll work. Because, if you're using UDP packets on the internet, then there's a chance it'll get lost. Just send it again.
Sure.
But if you have no network connection, you don't want to sit there sending it again until it times out, right? And so
That makes sense.
So in this case, we don't want to retry after a timeout. We want to fail immediately to avoid just a long hang for no reason. So now Rebound detects this condition and responds with an empty packet so that, libc will continue to work properly and keep things going. He also looked at some diffs for the from Malik, previously proposed by Daniel McKay, which add more integrity checking to the use after free detection, and worked on that. He says those should be able to be integrated soon. He also continued some work left over from the UTF-8 hackathon. Although Ingo has taken over the coding efforts there's some good diffs to review and test, and it would be a hackathon if you didn't have to deal with at least one feature request for DoAS. So yeah, that was his report. There's also a report from Alexander Nedvedigi, who's the guy from Oracle that's doing the MP-safe version of PF. So he was at the hackathon, and he said he'd like to thank Rake for hosting the hackathon and getting the hacker rooms, and also taking them to the Christmas market there where the hackathon was. And it was also his great pleasure to finally meet Henning Brouwer in person. And he says, then speaking of Henning, let's talk about PF. So then he says MPI, who's one of the other OpenBSD committers, came with a patch, which is currently on the private list, but will be public eventually, which adds new locks to PF. It's called PF Big Lock. The big PF lock essentially establishes a safe playground for PF hackers to work in. The lock currently covers all PF_test functions. The PF test function part will gradually unlock as the work progresses, but it allows that to move on. To make PF Big Lock safe, a few more details needed to be sorted out. The first of them is to avoid recursive calls to PF test, because if you're holding the lock and then you call yourself and try to hold the lock again, you'll wait forever, right?
Sure.
The PF test could get entered recursively when packets hit block rules with a return action. There's no longer the case as IP star send function got introduced, which is a committed change that's been discussed privately. Packets sent on behalf of the kernel are dispatched using the softnet task queues now. We still have to sort out the PF route functions. The other thing we need to sort out with respect to the PF Big Lock is reference counting for the state key, which gets attached to an mbuff when it's going through the firewall. Patches have been sent to the hackers list, waiting for review. The plan is to commit reference counting sometimes next year after CVS is unlocked for the next version of OpenBSD. He says there's one more patch on the tech mailing list waiting for review as well. It brings OpenBSD and Solaris PF closer to each other by one tiny little step. And hopefully, as that keeps happening, they'll both be able to keep up to date with each other.
That sounds neat. So I guess next year sometime we'll start seeing some of that land. I'll be curious to see. Of course, people got to do benchmarks at that point and start seeing like what kind of improvements we get with PF being NP safe. That's going to be interesting to watch. And of course, we will bring you the latest on that when patches start landing in the tree and when there's things for you guys to play with. All right, so next up we have an ACMQ, Challenges of Memory Management on Modern NUMA Systems. Okay, computer science guys, here we go.
Well, it turns out that this applies to a lot more people than it used to, right? Yeah, so this is from ACM's Q magazine, which has lots of technical stuff for programmers and so on. But basically, this is a research paper done by a bunch of people at Simon Fraser University here in Canada, talking about basically NUMA systems. So NUMA is non-uniform memory access, and basically means, in your typical computer, you have a processor and a bank of memory and they're connected and that's fine. But in high-end servers, you often have 2 or 4 processors, and nowadays, with the number of cores they have and so on, each of those processors is only connected to certain banks of the memory, right? So like on the fancy 2 processor server I have from IX, it's got like 32 cores in it. There's a whole bunch of banks of RAM over here that are connected to this processor, and the other ones over here are connected to the other processor. And it's coherent in the Intel setup. It's so CPU 1 can access the memory that's connected to CPU 2, but it's not direct. It goes through the second, and so it's slower. It's a little bit slower, and it also takes longer. Right? There's higher latency, and there can be bandwidth limits. And so oftentimes what you want to do is, if a program is running on CPU number 2, you want to make sure that the memory it allocates comes from the memory that's attached to that CPU. But, it gets very, quickly gets out of hand when you have 4 or 8 processors, each with a bunch of cores, and who knows how many different memory regions, right?
Yeah, and what happens, if you can access the memory, but you prefer this memory, but if you have to, you will go here where it's slower.
And so
that can get complicated.
Yeah, so modern server class systems are typically built as several multi-core chips put together in a single system. Each chip has its local RAM modules together. That's referred to as a node. Nodes are connected via high-speed interconnect, so it's like QPI on Intel chips. And the systems are fully coherent, so everywhere can talk to everywhere. Although there are types of NUMA systems where, the second CPU can't even see the RAM from the first CPU. And then it gets much more complicated. But this means that transparently to the programmer, a core can issue requests to its node's local memory, as well as memory connected to other nodes. The key distinction is that memory requests going to foreign nodes will take longer because they, have longer wire delays and have to jump several hops maybe. Not every CPU is connected to every bank of RAM directly. Sometimes, if you're on CPU 1, you have to go through CPU 2 or 3 to get to CPU 4. And there's a kind of a diagram of that here. The latency of memory access times is not uniform, meaning that, if you read a megabyte of memory and then read a second megabyte, it might be wildly different time that it takes to do it. And that can cause your application to act really strange, right? If you're assuming that you're expecting a certain level of performance. Because it depends on where the request originates and where it has to go. So, depending what core the program runs on, it'll have different throughput and latency to different bits of memory. So, there are a number of different NUMA strategies for dealing with this. The first one is fixed, where you say, memory is always allocated from a specific bank or something. Kind of like when you use the CPU set program on FreeBSD, you say, this program will always run on these cores, and you can log it there, and then you can say always allocate memory for this program or for in general from this bank of memory. So you have that, but if you end up running off core number 13, which is on the 4th processor, and accessing RAM that's on the 1st processor, then it'll be slower. Then there's first touch, which means that the memory is allocated from the bank connected to the CPU that's running the thread that initially requests the memory. So, wherever the program happens to be at the time when it wants memory, you get it from that bank. But the CPU scheduler in the OS could move that program to a different core, and then the next time it goes to access that memory, it's slower. But if the scheduler got smarter or was tuned to say, move things only in dire situations, then that might work better. But the idea with first touch is when a program starts using memory, get that memory from the closest CPU and hope that that gives us the highest percentage of the time we're getting memory from the closest bank of RAM. Or there's round robin, or what's in the papers called interleave. And that's where basically you just go around in circles allocating memory, right? So you allocate here, then here, then here, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and keep going around. And that can be almost worst case, actually. But the advantage with that is it means that on average, your latency is going to be the same all the time. Because most of the time, you're going to go to the further away node. And so, it causes memory to be evenly distributed. So you get, you can use all your RAM that way, obviously. And more uniform performance, right? Your program will be less spiky because it's always going to be accessing remote RAM. The other interesting thing there is that it can help deal with congestion. So the links that connect the different CPUs have limited bandwidth. So if you're on CPU 4 and all the memory you want is on CPU 2, and CPU 1 is also trying to use all the memory from CPU 2, they can get really busy, and CPU 2, the latency will go up as each request has to wait longer and longer to get its turn to use the memory. And so by spreading it out, you try to use up all the bandwidth that's available between all the different interlinks. So it can be interesting. Then Linux has one called AutoNuma, which basically has a kernel task that routinely iterates through all the allocated memory on each process and tallies the number of memory pages on each node for that process. So it's like, all right, so this program has some memory here and some over here and a little bit over here and a whole lot over here. And keeps track of that. It then clears the present bit on the pages. So it says, it makes it look like that memory's been swapped out or something. That will force the CPU to stop and enter the page fault handler next time something tries to access that memory. In the page fault handler, it then records which CPU and thread is trying to access that page. Then it marks it as present and the program continues because it's not actually been swapped out. And it allows execution to continue. Pages that are accessed from remote nodes are put in a queue to be migrated to that node. So if you're on CPU number 2 and you keep accessing RAM from CPU number 3, it will just be like, okay, I'm going to copy that memory over to CPU 2 and then erase it off 3, right? So I'm just going to move the memory closer to you. And maybe that will help. After a page has been migrated once, any future migrations require 2 recorded accesses from a remote node. Otherwise, you can end up with the page being bounced back and forth, right? If there's a consumer on each CPU, you'll just be copying it back and forth all the time. It'll actually make things worse rather than better. So only if it's continually being accessed from another core. After you move it once, you get less and less eager to keep moving it. But the paper that the ACMQ article is about actually introduces a new strategy called Care for. And it's a memory management algorithm for NUMA systems that focuses on traffic management, placing memory so as to minimize congestion on the interlinks or the memory controllers. So trying to strike a balance between locality, using the RAM that's closest and fastest, but also ensuring that the interconnects between specific pairs of CPUs don't become congested, which makes remote accesses even slower. So it uses 3 different techniques to accomplish this. So it's kind of a hybrid of all the different methods. The first one is memory colocation, which is moving memory to a different node so that accesses will be local. So it kind of works a little bit like the AutoNuma thing and the first touch, the idea of let's try to keep the memory near the program. But it also does replication, where if a piece of memory is very popular, is being used by 2 of the CPUs or all the CPUs or something, we could actually just make a copy of it and have all 4 CPUs have a local copy.
Like for real.
Yeah, so it especially has to look at it because if it's something that's being written a lot, it won't do that because the amount of work it takes to copy that memory. And also, the obvious downside of that is that you end up using more memory because all of a sudden you're keeping 4 copies of the kernel or something on each CPU. But if each CPU is using it all the time, that might well be worth it.
Sure.
And then the other is interleaving, right? Which is moving memory such that it's distributed evenly across all the nodes so that we can use up all that bandwidth rather than having it all sit over here and having congestion.
So it sounds like it uses all these techniques together to try and
Yeah.
find the best happy medium.
Well, the
for
big
you.
thing it does is it uses the HWPMC stuff and some instruction sampling to basically watch what the program's doing and then decide which of those techniques will be the best one for that program. Rather than having the other ones are always like whole system basically, and maybe it makes this one program faster, but it makes this other one slower. Whereas this one will kind of choose the best thing for the different load from each different thread. And that can make a big difference. Because even inside the same program, you could have two threads that use their memory very differently.
Sure.
So FreeBSD is slowly gaining NUMA capabilities for things like this. There's if you look on current, there's a NUMA man page and a NUMA set affinity system call that a program can make to say how it wants to do it. So on FreeBSD, there's a couple different supported mechanisms right now. There's fixed, which always get the memory from over here. Round robin, which is interleaved, or first touch. In addition, there are some other ones that combine them. So normally with fix, if you say get all your memory from over here, if you did that for the whole system, you would basically not be able to use the rest of your memory.
Sure.
But you can do it per program. So you can say, all right, this program, my web server should always use memory from this core, and this other application should always use memory from this other core. And if you used fixed or first touch, if you run out of memory in that region, it will return an error. Whereas if you used fixed-RR or first touch-RR, it'll fall over. So if you use first touch, but if you run out of memory there, then it'll fail over and just use round robin from then on until there's free memory again. So those are the options on FreeBSD right now. But hopefully maybe we can implement this care for one or some other things to be more proactive. Sure. What would really be handy is integrating more with the CPU scheduler so that, we could kind of apply a weight saying, hey, this program, most of its memory is on CPU number 4. So let's try to keep it running on CPU number 4. Maybe move something else to balance the CPU. Because right now it seems processes seem to like to jump all over the place to find free CPU time.
Sure.
And there's other power management things with that as well, right? If you can keep a smaller number of cores busy and the other half idle instead of each one of them doing 10% busy, you can actually save a lot of power as well.
Sleep things, yeah.
That's but cool. The other one you could hook it up to is something like the receive scaling on the networking card. So as the packets come in, they're being distributed across the different cores, and make sure that so the packet came in on this thread on the NIC and went into like CPU number 3. Let's make sure the web server worker that's going to read that request and write back to it or whatever is on the same CPU, so that it's reading from local memory instead of being far away. And so all of a sudden these kind of unrelated processes, like the thread of the network driver and the kernel and the userland application that's going to read and write to that socket or something, can be in entirely different places. And ideally, we would want to schedule them so they're on the same place. So it's very complicated. And then you kind of have to strike this balance between building stuff so that a web server like Nginx could learn how to deal with this stuff, or having the OS do it for you. But at a certain point, you don't want the OS trying to be really smart for you and actually doing it wrong.
Yeah, you almost need the flexibility of both. Yeah. You need the OS smart enough to do the basics, but then you need the advanced functionality for really performant applications that need to reach in and set it itself, because those developers know what they're doing too. Well, we'll of course keep an eye on that here, and need to see that that's already happening in current. So I guess maybe is that not been backported to 10, or is that just a kernel?
It's a current only, and it's not complete yet. So.
Okay. Well, we'll keep an eye on that. That'll be fun to see when that lands in 11.0 and see how that evolves over the next couple years. Okay, well, next up we have, is that Linux? Well, no, it's PCBSD. So Larry Kafiro, who we talked about last couple weeks, when he made some news switching from Linux over to PCBSD. This time he's posted a new blog post titled, "Is that Linux? No, it's PCBSD." He describes his experience where he's out and about and asked what's running on his laptop. And he said for the first time in 9 years, he wasn't able to answer that it's Linux. But the blog goes on to mention some of his experiences in getting up and running on PCBSD. He says how the learning curve is actually fairly easy if you're coming from a Linux background, which, when you're running a lot of the same apps on top, yeah, Firefox is Firefox, in both places. So he mentions that he did notice an uptick in performance on the system, though. He didn't run any specific benchmarks, but he said with Linux, he felt like it was fast enough on the machine. But he said in street racing parlance with PCBSD, I'm burning rubber in all four gears. So that is cool to hear. It's neat to see. I'd be curious to see if there are any benchmarks on why that is or what area in particular is performing better. He did mention a couple little nits he's having, trouble getting some font switching in Firefox. So I don't know what's going on there. But he mentioned he didn't know how to enable grub quiet mode, which I think I'll have to add a knob for you to do that, Larry. Part of the problem is in PCBSD, it's not necessarily a problem, but we do boot environments, so our grub menus are a lot more intimidating than a traditional Linux boot up where you have an option, which is boot Linux or boot an old kernel or something, right? We have all the boot environments. So by default, we show that to you, but maybe we'll throw
didn't
a
you
quiet mode in
change
there
it
if you
so that
really don't
you
want
had
to see it.
like boot PCBSD and then or select a previous one and then it was in a submenu?
Yeah, we did
Yeah.
clean it up. So the first one is going to be boot your default boot environment, and then the next entries will be if you're dual booting, that's where your Linux entries go or Windows or whatever. And then the last option is all your other boot environments, a submenu, which lets you view all those and select all the
I
older
think that
ones.
makes it a lot less
But
scary.
I think, yeah, it does make it a lot less scary. Not as bad as it used to be. But I think he wants it where it doesn't even show the menu. It just boots right into default unless you hold down some predefined
Yep.
key ahead of time, which we did have that. If you didn't have more than, if you only had one boot environment, it wouldn't show the menu. It would just show hold down left shift to bring the menu up. So I'll see if we can put a knob back in there
Cool.
for you to do that.
The other interesting one was, when he was at the cafe and he was showing somebody something or whatever, and like, oh, is that Linux? And he's like, no, it's PCBSD. But what was really surprising was the person who asked actually had a FreeBSD server at home, and he was surprised that Larry or anyone really would be using BSD as their day-to-day OS on a laptop. So, even BSD users sometimes don't seem to realize how well it works on a laptop.
Need to have some faith, folks. It does work, and you can make it work. And it's just getting better,
Yes.
as the Haswell stuff is landing in the branch over there. It's kind of neat to see all that evolve. Hopefully, we'll be seeing some Broadwell soon.
Yes.
So my X1 Carbon is a lot happier. But at the moment, it works pretty darn well. Okay, well, next up we have this is an interesting article here talking about how you can do dual booting of OS X and OpenBSD with full disk encryption, which
So
that sounds kind of
this used to be quite complicated because
Yeah.
when OpenBSD didn't have GPT support or EFI support, you had to use Boot Camp Assistant and set up a hybrid MBR GPT setup, which is really strange.
It is
And
odd.
enable a legacy BIOS emulation mode and so on. But now Boot Camp doesn't support that anymore. They don't support even Windows 7, only Windows 10 with GPT and EFI. And so it's kind of a good thing that we all have that now. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to
Sure.
dual boot on the Mac. This basically goes through the steps of setting up dual boot on the Mac, so they want disk encryption. So they enabled File Vault, the Mac OS X disk encryption on their OS X disk. Then they basically walk through resizing that to make it smaller so that they'll have some free space after they run, HFS truncate FS to get some free space. Then they download OpenBSD and put it on a USB stick, reboot the Mac and boot off that USB stick, drop into the OpenBSD installer shell, take that MS-DOS partition, slice it up, set it up for soft RAID, and set it up with the OpenBSD's disk encryption, and basically install OpenBSD into that. And then OpenBSD will detect the EFI and install its EFI bootloader into your EFI partition. So he goes through and renames that from EFI boot to EFI OpenBSD, and then boots back into OS 10 and installs Refind so that you will get a menu. And now when you boot up the machine, you'll get, your little Mac logo, your little puffy logo, and you pick which one you want, and it boots up, and you're good to go.
That's really neat. That is really neat. Man, we need more tutorials like that because I know there's a lot of people out there with older or even newer
Yeah.
MacBooks who want to try this kind of stuff
So this
out.
works on, he had his 2011 MacBook Air and a
Hmm.
2013 MacBook Air that's Haswell. So he has a Sandy Bridge and a Haswell, and he's tried it on both.
Okay. Well, I guess, Alan, when we get your jelly patches in there and then we make all that stuff work with EFI, maybe we'll have to write a tutorial on how to do this with FreeBSD as
Yeah,
well. That could be
EFI.
interesting.
I want to do that. I'm not being sarcastic.
Right? Okay, folks. Well, we're going to have an interview here in just a moment. But of course, before we get to that, we need to mention our first sponsor this week, which is going to be DigitalOcean and the website for that, digitalocean.com. You've heard us talk about these guys for a while now, but if you've not tried them out, maybe you need to set a little time aside to do so, especially if you need to throw something up in the
Hmm.
cloud and you want fast access. The SSDs, everything's backed by, make it pretty darn
Hmm.
awesome to run. And the price is so darn cheap. I mean, $5 a month for the lowest end VM that you can spin up over there with a terabyte of transfer a month. I mean, come on, that is a really good deal. But what's really cool is we are giving you a neat coupon code. So if you type in FreeBSDNow in the coupon code section, it'll give you a $10
Hmm.
credit. So you can run basically 2 months of a VM for free and give it a whirl. Try it out
Hmm.
with no obligation there. But website's great. Takes about 50 seconds to a minute to spin up a VM or tear something down. And it is really quite nice. I've even upgraded mine a couple
Yep.
times here too, or you can upgrade it to a higher tier if you need more RAM or whatever, or more transfer,
Yeah,
etc.
and the other great thing is that coupon code will work retroactively. So if you've already been using
Hmm.
DigitalOcean for a while, stick in our coupon code anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, you might as well get the
Yeah.
$10 credit. So do that now. Don't put it
Hmm.
off. We don't know how long that coupon code will last if they just decide to take it offline at some point, because it's been around for a little bit now. But if you've been waiting to try it out, please do so sooner rather than later. And let us know how that
Hmm.
goes, because, of course, they offer FreeBSD support, which is kind of
Hmm.
awesome. If you're an OpenBSD fan, don't feel left out, though. Go try DigitalOcean, find their guide on how to sideload OpenBSD, and you can end up with OpenBSD in a VM
Yep.
as well, which is just all the more awesome.
But they
So,
have some
yeah, give them a
new
shot today.
features that are quite interesting. We already talked a little
Oh,
bit
okay.
about floating IPs, but basically
Hmm.
you can have a static IP address and then decide which VM it points to, and then
Sure.
change it later. So this is especially good if you have like a website or something and you want to do an upgrade. You can, have the website running, going on your VM, snapshot and clone that VM, then, do your upgrade over here, and then you just point the IP to the new one, and then wait a little bit, see if it works. If it doesn't work, flip it back to the first one. But if it does, then you can leave it there and you can throw out the first VM.
Hmm. Okay.
Other things you can do with that are basically it works kind of like CARP, so you can set up for failover in case one of your VMs goes down or something. And
Hmm.
but basically, you can move an IP address around between droplets within the same data center. So that's quite interesting. And they haven't officially announced this yet or anything, but I've heard rumors about what they're working on, and it seems like pretty soon you'll be able to move IPs between data centers.
Ooh,
Hmm.
interesting. Yeah, that would
The
get neat. Of course, they have lots of data centers to choose
Yes.
from when
Yeah.
doing that.
We can just quickly go over that list, but they have Toronto, New York, and San Francisco for North America. I think London, Amsterdam, and Frankfurt for Germany. And they have Singapore for Asia.
Nice. Nice. So definitely a lot of options. They have neat tools on the website too, which will let you test your connectivity to each of those data centers
Yes.
as well. So when you're spinning one up, if you're not quite sure, like, do I want it in New York or do I want it here or there? Oh, give it a shot. Make sure your connectivity is the level that you want. Or if you want it super far away, you can check that too. Maybe you want something that's got
Hmm.
a higher ping to you, but maybe is local to somebody
Yeah.
else. So it's really neat that they allow you to
They
do that.
also have team accounts now. I love their
Hmm.
tagline for that. It's like, share your account's resources, not your login credentials or billing information.
That's
So
right.
basically, with
That's
team
right.
accounts, you can invite multiple users to access and manage your account's infrastructure resources while keeping sensitive information private. So you can
Hmm.
just invite someone to have access to your VM to help you set it up or something, or you can set it up so your kids have unlimited access to do stuff to their Minecraft VM or whatever, or
Hmm.
whatever different type of things you want to do. So whether it's just a friends and family type account, or if you're actually using it to host stuff for your business or whatever, the team accounts is definitely a useful feature to have.
I wonder if I should move my Minecraft server up
Mm-hmm.
there. I've been hosting that on my local network, and it is pretty CPU intensive on one of my
Mm-hmm.
boxes. Gets a little annoying. So maybe I'll have to try that out and let my 12-year-old start learning how to administer the
Mm-hmm.
box. That could end badly. But anyway, well,
Well, the
everyone's
nice
got to start
thing
somewhere.
about doing a DigitalOcean droplet like that is you can just take snapshots every once in a while. And then if it does go badly,
That's
you
true.
just rewind history and undo it all.
That's right. You broke it, son. But don't worry. We're going back to last Saturday. You're good. Well, again, guys, check them out today. That's DigitalOcean.com. Well, we're joined now by Paul Goyette, who's a NetBSD developer, who's here to talk to us about all things NetBSD, testing, modularization, etc. So, first of all, thank you so much for being on the show with us today, Paul. I know we had quite a time zone difference to make this work.
Yeah, no problem. It's a good morning here.
That's great. That's great. Well, since we've not had you on the show before, the same thing we ask everyone the first time they're here is, how did you first get introduced to and get involved with BSD?
Well, that's probably an easy question. I had a Mac 2 CI. It was the only thing I had way back when in early 1990s.
Hmm.
Um, and I came to the realization one day that Unix was the place to be. So I went looking for Unix that ran on the Mac. Couldn't find anything except for the NetBSD folks and Alan Briggs' original port of NetBSD to the Mac 68K platform.
Hmm.
So I started playing.
Isn't that how we all got started?
And I've been working with it ever since.
Okay.
I was a long time employee of Digital Equipment, DEC, and actually was recognized as a VMS expert at several places.
Mhm.
And decided one day that the proprietary solution just wasn't going to work. I had to learn Unix. This was it.
Great.
Was there anything specific that made you stick with NetBSD?
Um, well, it wasn't so much anything that made me stick as it was the path of least resistance, and change is work.
Yep.
I'm
That's true.
basically a lazy person at heart.
Yeah, I think that's a general programmer trait, right? Just the
Yeah.
path of least resistance on a lot of this. So,
People laugh at me because I work so hard at this stuff, and I say, I work hard because I want to get it right the first time, because I'm damned if I'm going to do it a second time.
that's right. I
Exactly.
don't want to look at that code again. Good Lord. So, tell us some of the things specifically you've worked on. What can we actually blame you for?
Well, way back in the day, and again, talking back in the 1990s now, my first contribution to the open source community was getting Color X running on the Mac 68K platform.
Okay.
Back in those days, we didn't have a whole lot of system services, if you will, on the Mac 68K. We basically emulated the Mac ROM for a lot of our syscalls. And I basically spent a lot of time decoding binary dumps of new bus ROM images to figure out what calls they were running, and then figuring out how to make NetBSD emulate them. If you do a search today, you'll still find my name out there referencing Slotman kernels, because we basically did the new bus slot manager calls got decoded. So I'm still out there.
Mm-hmm.
That's
I
really cool.
was just X doesn't look good in grayscale. It just doesn't look
No, it
good.
really doesn't.
That's kind of one of the interesting things with open source is if you had done that work for a proprietary system, it would probably be gone now and no one would ever be able to find it. But because you did open source, even the stuff that's really not necessarily relevant now is all still out there for people to find.
Yep.
Uh,
Yeah, I was surprised it was that long ago. I knew it was back in the 90s. I didn't realize it was 1993.
Oh, wow.
Long time.
yeah. So what else did you work on?
Oh, well, let's see. That was probably my biggest thing. Then, when I actually joined NetBSD as an official developer, my first contribution was a significant cleanup of the system monitoring subsystem, the sensor management, and so forth. It had been contributed by another developer a couple years earlier, and it had some serious problems,
Mm-hmm.
like overlapping alarm ranges that just didn't work. You could set a threshold that didn't make sense, and then it would go off and process it and try to make sense of it and kind of upchucked on it a little bit. So I basically did a major cleanup of that. My first commit was like about 2,000 source code lines.
Oh wow. Mm-hmm.
That's a big one for your first
And,
commit.
Sure.
Yeah, it was pretty good size. So after that, I kind of just wandered around for a while and then ran into the concept of testing. And regression testing became something that I was really interested in.
Mm-hmm.
We ended up with a test framework, again, was contributed by another developer, and it needed some extending. It did some extending to that. And then I had, for several years running, one of my many machines in my farm had been running a continuous build and test environment, where basically all it did all day long was fetch the latest sources, build. If the build was successful, run the test suite, report the results.
Mm-hmm.
And I did that for years. I had a website out there with the historical information of how many tests we ran, how many succeeded, how many passed, how many failed, but we know why they failed,
Mm-hmm.
which is an important thing.
Mm-hmm.
And up until about a year and a half ago, that was still up and running. Since I retired last year and moved here to the Philippines, it's difficult to get fixed IP addresses. In fact, it's difficult to get internet service at all.
Mm-hmm.
So couldn't get a fixed IP address, so I couldn't offer the results out to the web. And the electric bills just get a little bit prohibitive here, and I kind of like turned most of my farm off so I could run the aircon instead.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Which is important, I'm sure.
I mean, here it's 8:30 in the morning, and the temperature is actually fairly cool today. It's only 30 centigrade.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, it's usually about 32 by now.
here in Canada, it's like 7.
No, thank you.
Yeah, well, my partner and I are thinking of moving back as soon as we can get some immigration issues resolved. We're looking at Oregon, where 30 is going to be like the absolute max, not the
Yeah.
minimum.
Middle of summer, right? That's a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're working on that.
Cool. So you could tell us a bit more about what you actually did with the continuous build, install, test system and the regression testing?
Well, it kind of triggered me to write a whole lot more tests, for one thing. We increased the test suite. I'm not sure how many we've got now, but at the time we had a couple of thousand test cases that were running. There were bits and pieces of the test framework from earlier manual testing environments that had been running around in our source tree for a while, and a lot of those I ended up converting to fit into the automated test framework. So we ended up with a fairly robust test suite. And we also managed to convince the rest of the NetBSD group to dedicate project machines to running the equivalent, although a different software, but they're the equivalent of the continuous build and test environment. So we actually have i386 systems running in the same mode. We've got AMD 64. I think there's somebody out there running a VAX or maybe an Alpha, and somebody's actually running a Spark, doing more or less continuous testing. It really found a lot of bugs, and we would have found the bugs anyways. But by having an automated test framework that just does nothing but look for them, you find them a lot faster. And you get a much better chance of getting them fixed before you actually impact the real user community.
Yeah, I think that's some of the big advantage. One of them being that if you catch the bug close to when it's introduced, the developer still has the state built up about what that code is supposed to be doing and has better chance to fix it correctly quickly. Whereas if it's something that code hasn't been touched in years and someone has to go and figure out how it all works to figure out why it's not working the right way, that's a lot more work.
Yeah, the probability for introducing more errors goes way up.
Yeah, well, and I just ran into a case like that this morning that I've got to, when we finish here, I've got to go and fix. Turns out that our I2C driver um, is a modular system. It's loadable at runtime as opposed to having to be built into the kernel. But if you load it at runtime, then you can't run certain I/O controls against it. So we can't do, for example, an I2C scan to go see what's on the I2C bus if you've loaded the driver dynamically.
Well,
And it used to work, so somebody broke it somewhere, and it was probably me.
Yeah.
Now I've got to go and restore all that context to figure out where it went wrong.
yeah.
So I know we had here to talk to you a little bit about modularizing systems using NetBSD's kernel module framework. So what subsystems or things have you worked on in that area?
Well, I've actually spent more time than anything on the modular subsystem itself, the loader and the code that manages the dependencies between modules, gets them to load when they're supposed to load in the right order. I've actually done some of the modularization work. Recently, I converted our drive control and clock control drivers to be modular so that they can actually be loaded at runtime rather than having to be linked into the kernel at build time in a monolithic manner. It really helps in debugging this stuff if they're modular because you don't have to reboot the machine.
Sure.
To test something. When I had a farm of 6 or 8 machines running, it was no big deal. I just throw the code on and boot something and see what was going on. But these days, it's a whole lot easier to load up a QEMU virtual machine and then run the thing and load the modules in and see what happens. If it doesn't work, unload it and load a new version in. Much less intrusive on the rest of the machine. And it's actually faster than it is to go and install on a bare bone R. It actually works faster. So that's what I've been doing a lot of lately. Many of the NetBSD developers don't like modularization. When we first introduced it, yeah, and it's kind of historical. When we first introduced it years ago, there were some serious shortcomings. Bugs, big bugs, ones with thousands of legs. It didn't work very well, and it actually caused a lot of problems. And a lot of people got, for want of a better description, a sour taste in their mouth from using it. Rather than fixing it, they decided they wanted to go back to the old way. So most of the people tend to run more or less monolithic kernels. They may have a module that gets loaded if they really want to try something, but for production work, they don't use them. Most of the people avoid the modules, especially the auto-loading capability of the modules. On the other hand, I took the opposite approach, and I really adopted modularization as this is really a cool thing. It's really cool to be able to pull something out and plug in a new piece if you want to try something, or if you actually would just want to add some functionality to your kernel. It's really cool. And I endorsed it wholeheartedly. And I run at loggerheads with some of the developers every now and then about, getting certain things in. But it really makes life a lot easier to debug stuff. And from a production standpoint, it's really production quality now. It's really good. We have code that'll, if you call a syscall that's marked as a modular syscall, if the module's not resident, it'll go off and load it. If you call a driver, the driver's not in the kernel, we'll go and see if we can find a module that matches that driver. If you run an emulation or an execution model, for example, if you got a 64-bit kernel and you want to run an ELF32 image, it'll go and find the NetBSD 32 compatibility module and load it.
That's kind of nice having that on-demand availability.
That'd be really nice to have for our Linux emulation in FreeBSD, to have it just auto-load the kernel module if...
Yeah, there's been a lot of bugs and PRs we've fixed in PCBSD where it's like, oh, you just didn't
Yeah,
have the right module loaded, right?
it's
It's like,
hard. It's hard to get it right.
Mm-hmm.
But it's worth it, in my opinion.
Yeah.
yeah, for sure.
Because when FreeBSD finally got it right, in all of FreeBSD 4, I compiled custom kernels with all these options all the time. But from 6 onward, I've run the generic stock kernel and loaded all the modules because it's just so much better.
Yeah. Well, the NetBSD folks, the generic kernel has everything built into the kernel. It has the loader capability of loading modules, but basically everything that would be in a generic kernel that most everybody would be wanting is already built in. That runs, let's see, I think at last count it was about 150 modules that are built in at link time for the kernel. On the opposite end of the scale is me, who runs a stripped down kernel. I only have 40 modules in the kernel, and most of those are only there because they've been pseudo modularized, but they really haven't gotten the dependencies straightened out yet. For example, the HD audio component, there's some circular dependencies, which means if you don't build them in, you can't load them because you can't get the cart before the horse.
Right.
A few of those is some with the video, the DRM drivers for the video cards have similar dependencies that just aren't quite resolved yet. So, but I've only got 40 modules that when I load up. Everything else is auto-loaded as needed. File systems, if I load a temp file system, it goes off and finds the tempfs module and loads it.
That's the way it should be.
Yeah, I think the first time I saw that used really effectively was actually BSD Can a couple of years ago. There was a demonstration about a patch they were doing to ZFS. And so they loaded the regular ZFS module and showed you how it worked and gave it this pathological workload that would cause it to be really slow. And like, okay. So then what we did is unload that module and load the one they just built with their code and then run the exact same test and it behaves differently. And it's like, oh, I can see how you can just hot swap file system drivers there and do the side-by-side comparison.
Isn't that
Like,
cool?
Yeah, that's really cool.
Exactly. We talked to Warner Losh, FreeBSD project, a couple months ago about he's trying to build the system for the drivers in the FreeBSD kernel where it will detect the presence of the device and then load the correct driver. So, you would have a more stripped down kernel with fewer drivers built into it. And then when it boots up, it'd be like, oh, I see you have this kind of network card. Let me get the right driver for that. But I don't know that it's very like x86 specific.
Yeah, I'll have to go check with Warner and see how much progress he's making, because that's the one thing that we haven't got in our framework at the moment is the auto configure integration with auto loading of modules. Probe the bus, see what's there, and load the modules. We haven't got that yet.
I guess I kind
If you reference a device, if you reference the device and the device isn't loaded, we go and try to find the driver for it. But if you have a bus and you want to scan the bus and see what's on it and load modules, we don't have that yet.
Right. So I guess that kind of leads into my next question, which was, what areas do you think could be improved with more modularization?
Well, I'm not sure if the modularization itself would improve the resulting code, but it makes it so much easier and faster to find the bugs that I think everything would in general benefit from the modularization. I don't think it would make anything better by itself, just better faster.
Right, and it gives more flexibility to the user maybe, and a couple things like that. They're less direct side effects.
Yeah, and one of the objections we often get is, gee, if you have so many different variations of what can be in memory, then it makes it harder to debug. Well, too bad. That's our job.
Right.
The users should be able to make things as convenient for them as possible, and we should be fixing the bugs if we make the bugs.
Right.
We shouldn't be restricting user environments to minimize the bugs. We shouldn't write the damn bugs in the first place.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Good policy.
Yeah. So, do you know how NetBSD's modularity compares to some of the other BSDs?
Actually, I've not really looked at any of the other BSDs to see what their modular capabilities are. I've been pretty much heads down in NetBSD. Every once in a while, I'll go look at one of the other BSDs for something if somebody references it to me. But I really don't follow the other guys nearly as much as I should. And I mean, I've got a lot of free time now. Maybe I should start doing that. I
See, just
retired a little over a year ago from Juniper Networks, and pretty much BSD is all I got right now, and it's keeping me sane.
hmm
It is my hobby. Well, that and eating and a little bit of travel around here. Um, Lots of nice beaches here in the Philippines. But there's not much else that's occupying my time, so I probably ought to start looking more at what the free and even the open guys are working on these days,
Oh,
dragonflies.
lots of neat stuff that they're doing. All of
yeah.
them.
Although recently,
Yes.
OpenBSD got rid of their modularity framework entirely. They realized they had only two
Good.
modules and they just ripped it out.
That's unfortunate.
Hmm.
So now that you've told us you're retired, so are you looking at or working on any new areas of NetBSD, or pretty much just sticking with the modularization work?
Well, at least for now, I'm just planning on sticking with the modularization work. It's what's caught my fancy lately, and I think in the beginning I mentioned that I was a utility infielder. I do whatever is up at the moment, whatever needs to get done. If
hmm
something tickles my fancy, I'll probably dive into it and figure out what's going on and make it work better. That's kind of like the approach I've taken, for the last 20 plus years now.
Sure.
Wow. So yeah, it's been a while, but that's the approach. If I don't like something, I'm not one to sit there and complain about it. I'll go out and fix it, make it better.
Hmm.
I may not make it best, but I'll make it better.
Yeah, if everyone just improves it a little, pretty soon everything's pretty nice.
Yeah.
So now that you are definitely working on it by choice, like maybe when you're at Juniper, part of it was your job, but now that it's all by choice, what keeps you motivated to work on BSD stuff?
I don't think I ever really needed any motivation. It's really it's what I enjoy to do.
Mhm.
And you mentioned when I was at Juniper that this might be part of my job. Actually, it wasn't. I was a customer service rep
Ah.
and a release engineering manager. Um, and the BSD stuff that I worked on was what kept me sane when the job pressures got to be absolutely insane. I actually kind of retreated away from the work and into BSD as, well, more or less therapy.
hmm
And it's really what I've enjoyed. I've been working and coding longer than you guys have been alive, more than
Mhm.
likely. Try having my first full-time IT job in 1971.
Oh yeah,
That's well before I was alive.
yeah, same here.
So I've been around a while. It's what I enjoy. It's what I'm fairly good at. I won't say I'm really good at anything, but I'm fairly good at this. I do a pretty good job, and I make mistakes. People correct me all the time.
Mhm.
I don't worry about it. I just say, okay, fine, thank you, and move on to the next mistake.
Sure, yeah. Keep on plugging away. So now that you've moved to the Philippines, do you have any other hobbies that you're doing besides BSD? I imagine things are all different
Uh,
now.
well, yeah, it's kind of a little different here. Life works at a different pace here in the Philippines. In some ways, it's faster than back in the States. In some ways, it's a little slower. The traffic is an absolute nightmare. Um, I think they've got about 10 times as many cars as there is room on the highways for them.
Oh wow.
So pretty much constant gridlock. Um, we had a international conference here in the Manila area a couple of weeks ago. Economic conference. Obama was here and so forth. Um, we actually got caught in a traffic jam where in 2 hours we moved about 2 kilometers.
Oh wow. Just get out and walk
And
at that point.
some people got stuck in worse traffic than that.
Oh my. No, thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, we're actually considering the move back, as I mentioned earlier. The weather here is warmer than I remember from my earlier visits. The traffic, as I say, has gotten absolute nightmare. Um, so yeah, we're just working get us back there sometime, probably in another year.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah,
So,
get to be a little bit more comfortable.
Sure.
yeah. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about?
Um, Gee, no, I actually can't think of anything else. I want to thank you guys for having me on the show.
Mhm.
Yeah,
It's
thank
great. I
you.
don't get too many volunteers from the NetBSD camp. Um,
Yes, we were
We need
very
to
and
glad.
encourage more NetBSD developers to come on here and talk to us about what's going on.
yeah, one of our guys did something recently, and Christos mentioned that you, Alan, in particular, were a good contact to do a little bit more exposition of the NetBSD world. And I said, what the heck, give it a try. So thank you for having me on. I'm
Thank you for taking
grateful
the
for the
time.
opportunity to talk about NetBSD.
No,
And
we definitely
yeah,
appreciate it, especially working out the time differences that you were able to work
yeah,
with us on this.
well, it's no problem. I'm usually up early in the morning. I get up around 6 a.m. You know, that's actually for me. It's late. I used to get up at 5 when I was working, so I'm actually sleeping in now.
Oh wow. Enjoy that extra hour.
Yeah, that extra hour is wonderful.
Yeah.
So, thanks a lot, guys.
Oh well, you're welcome.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being with us today, Paul, and keep in touch. Let us know what's going on in NetBSD land.
Yes. And maybe we'll
Will
see you
do.
at Asia BSDCon.
That's right.
Um,
It's in March.
Yeah, possible depending upon whether I get my immigration here taken care of.
Oh yeah,
Ah.
yep. Get the
I mean,
paperwork
I can
done, then we'll.
stay. Yeah, I just have to keep renewing my visa. If I leave the country, then I start the process all over again.
What a bummer.
So,
Okay.
yeah, it's immigration laws, aren't they wonderful?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they are. They are. Cool. Well, thank you again, Paul. We
Yes.
appreciate it, and we'll try and see you again. Catch up to you later.
Great. Thanks a lot, guys.
All right, hope you guys enjoyed the interview, folks, but we got to get to the news roundup. And of course, before we do that, we need to mention our other sponsor this week, which is going to be IX Systems. And it looks like they had a good week here. There's some fancy new award they won, I
yes.
believe. Hopefully,
I
you have
do.
that up on the screen. You can show us that, Alan.
Yes. They won 2 awards from the Best in Business award place or whatever. So they won the silver winner for product line of the year because of with the TrueNAS for enterprise storage, and also the silver winner for most consumer friendly company of the year for a medium sized company.
Okay.
Which is something we've been trying to tell people for a
102,000.
long time.
See, now you don't have to believe us. So if we're one of these zero trust peoples and you don't believe us, like, look, it's been verified by now an independent organization has given them awards saying that they are the best. How awesome is that? But let's see, there's a whole bunch of quotes in here.
Yes.
It talks a little bit about IX
Yeah.
Systems.
IX Systems' recent showing at the Best in Business is a testament to our genuine commitment to our clients and begins with our white glove consultative sales approach and completes with the 5-star customer support when the tightly integrated company can provide. They're providing the hardware and the software, and they know how it works, and they have committers for the open source projects that it's based on, and the alliances with the storage vendors and the controller vendors and so on, and just you can't find the same thing anywhere else really.
That is cool. So, of course, guys, them winning these awards is great and all, but have you made them your storage appliance vendor yet? You really should. Even if you're not doing storage, maybe you just want to get some awesome servers made. I know in past episodes, if you haven't seen, we talked about the system they rolled with the, what was it? How many network cards did they have in it? 40 NICs?
24 10 gigabit NICs.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Uh,
That was a fun
yeah,
one.
they have a whole bunch of interesting ones like that. They also did another one with, what was it, like 80 cores or something like that? Ridiculous speed. But the other awesome
And there
one.
was the memory system.
Yeah, there's one with like 6 terabytes of RAM.
That's right. And the whole chassis is just RAM expanders.
Yeah. But one of the other cool ones recently was the 5 petabyte per rack system they built for it was
NASA.
the university research group that works with NASA, and they needed
Mm-hmm.
we need like 4 terabytes of space with room to grow, and they're like, okay,
Yeah, they can make that
exactly.
happen. So if they can do these wild systems, and maybe you need a wild system like that, well, shoot, you should give them a call today, guys, or go to their website, of course, which is ixsystems.com/BSDNow. Let them know you're a listener here, and when you call up, they'll be like, "Oh yes, we know the BSD Now
Hmm.
guys, and we'll take good care of you." So be sure to mention our name there, but they will get you hooked up, and even if you don't need something that wild and big, they can make everything down to a FreeNAS
Hmm.
Mini. So if you're a home user and just need something you can throw in the closet or under your desk that's quiet and you can throw a bunch of drives in, I mean, they can handle that
Yeah.
for you as well. Or you can even buy them off of
Yes.
Amazon. So how
The
cool
price
is
on
that?
Amazon was recently lowered, so
Nice. What is it? 900 now? 800, I
there's a
think, for
bunch of
the.
different models, so it depends what you're looking for.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. So just throw some drives in there and away you go.
Hmm.
You got a nice ZFS storage appliance ready to
Yep.
go. So again, guys, if you talk to IX, let us know. We like to hear your stories, or if you have some really cool hardware you're ordering, take pictures and send that in because we like to see those too. Okay, so our first news roundup story this week, we got another how to do L2TP with IPsec on
Hmm.
OpenBSD. So who wrote this
This
one here,
was
Alan?
Seven Janian, who's basically
Mhm.
the star BSD contributor. He's just, I think I've seen him commit something to every single project.
You had to
Yeah.
cover them all.
So he's basically updating an old Road Warrior VPN configuration. So, as
Hmm.
someone who has to travel a lot, it's great to be able to VPN to home from all your devices and have it work. Uh, and so, the kind of canonical article for this was on Undeadly back in 2012. But since then, a lot of things have changed and got a lot easier. And so he's updating the tutorial to kind of showcase that. So the first article, which we're highlighting here, walks through setting up the OpenBSD server for it. And then he'll have follow-up
Hmm.
articles coming soon that covering the configuration of various client systems connecting to it. Um, so,
So like the
yeah,
Windows and
so
OS
the
X and all
tutorial
that.
has everything you need: the PF rules, how to configure NPPPD, how to set up ISAK and IPsec and all that. And yes, as someone in the comments is like, well, you can just use OpenVPN or whatever. He's like, the reason the tutorial uses L2TP and IPsec is because basically every OS has this built in now. So whether your
Hmm.
client is Windows, OS 10, iOS, Android, whatever, those all have a native L2TP client, or you can get them in for FreeBSD and OpenBSD or whatever. And so most times it means you don't even have to install any extra software, which is especially
Which is
helpful on
handy.
like your phone or something. Um,
Hmm.
or if you're using someone else's computer, right? If you're at a conference or something, or who knows what, maybe you have some requirement where you have to use this Windows computer at a computer lab or something rather than your own computer.
Sure.
Well, when it has software built in to do the VPN, instead of you having to try to find some program and install it, that makes your life a lot easier.
That is true. That is
Hmm.
true. Well, that's cool. It's neat to see people updating old tutorials like that as
Hmm.
well. So if we find more of those, we will bring them along
But
for you.
yeah, so much has changed in OpenBSD over the years that this new
Mhm.
tutorial is much easier to follow than the old one.
Okay. Well, next up we have Dragonfly. We've been teasing it that the 4.4 was coming, and it looks
Hmm.
like 4.4 has been released on December
Well,
7th.
actually,
So it
they
just
did
came out.
4.4.1 to include the
Oh,
OpenSSL
sorry.
update. So
Oh, really?
4.4.0 actually was never released. They just went straight to
Ah, okay.
4.4.1 because
Hey,
what
well, good
was
for them.
4.4.0 was canned because of the OpenSSL.
Oh, good for them. Good for them. So that is officially out
Hmm.
now. So, of course, there are a lot of big changes in this release, but some of the highlights, and we'll have the link here if you want to go read the notes yourself. But of course, Radeon and the i915 Intel drivers have been updated with support all the way up to Linux kernel
Hmm.
3.18, which,
I think
wow,
that
that's really
includes, that's
awesome.
definitely Broadwell, but might even include Skylake. It's a bunch of,
Yeah, maybe parts of it
or at least
or
some of
some early ones.
the other ones for Atom processors as well. So that helps some of
Hmm.
the cheaper tablets and notebooks.
Yeah, that is really slick. Very jealous, guys, but good work on that. They also mentioned they got proper collation support for named locales borrowed from FreeBSD 11 current.
Yes.
So that is really cool to
Now
see.
they say borrowed from FreeBSD, but they did a lot of the work to get it into
Sure.
FreeBSD, or to bring it from Illumos and make it in such a way that it could be used by both Dragonfly and FreeBSD. So big props to the people that did that.
Yes, thank you. I know a lot of people will appreciate that. They also mentioned that a regex support using a TRA or TRE has been added. So they said, as a consequence of the locale upgrade, the original regex library had to be forced into POSIX single byte mode always. The support for multi-byte characters just wasn't there. They said TRE is faster, more capable, and supports multi-byte characters. So this is a nice addition to have in this release.
Yep, and it's already used by Musel, which is the one of the alternative libcs for Linux, and by OS 10.
Okay. That's
So
cool.
it's
already being used out in
yeah.
the wild. Other noteworthy things, looks like the IWM driver. So for the later Intel
the
wireless,
7260s
brought in. Some CPU power saving improvements, and then this one, which we were a little confused on talking about earlier, about importing IPFW from FreeBSD and named IPFW3. That was a line item there. We weren't quite sure if that's just a direct import or are we writing stuff on top of it or how that works. But we'd be curious if a Dragonfly developer, maybe whoever's working on that, may need to come on the show and tell us what exactly they're doing with IPFW over there.
Yeah, so they have some more detail on the graphics here. So the latest update of their i915 means that they have support for Valley View, Bay Trail, and Cherry View Atom SoCs.
Okay.
The Broadwell is fully accelerated, and the preparatory work for Skylake is there, but not everything for Skylake.
So, okay, not quite yet.
They also report that the system console now supports DRM graphics by default, so your virtual terminals don't show just a black screen once you start X.
Very handy. I know we had talked about the panel self-refresh aware, 15 episodes ago or so now. It's been a little while. But on i915 hardware, which can save some battery life as well. So that's a pretty neat feature to see. And temperature sensors are supported on the Radeon hardware as well.
Which is definitely important. You don't want your video card overheating.
That's right. So let's see. Any other improvements here? So some Hammer improvements. They said a lot of cleanups and fixes to Hammer 1 were put in.
Oh, I see they ported TCP drop, which is one of my favorite tools. Allows you to basically drop a specific TCP connection.
Nice. Okay, here. Well, one other thing that was mentioned in here, which is kind of interesting, we have another story linked here as well on Slashdot, but that they switched to the gold linker as well in this release. So that's something new out here. I guess that's a GPLv3 linker. Have you tried that, Alan?
No, I remember hearing a bit about it at Asia BSD Con a little while ago, a couple of years ago. I think my first Asia BSD Con. Because there was work on a BSD license linker instead of, because the only alternative at the time I think was gold, because the Clang one is there. I know on the FreeBSD project is Ed Mass and some other people are working very hard on LLD, the LLVM linker.
Okay. Well, cool. Neat to see that. Okay. Well, next up we have a neat how-to/guide, and I apologize if I pronounce this wrong. Is it Agenti?
Or Argenti, something like that.
Argenti? Well, there's no R, it's Agenti or something. But anyway, looks like it's kind of a webmin alternative, but we got a guide on how to set that up with Nginx on SSL on FreeBSD 10.2 specifically is what they're doing here. So, of course, if you're looking for something that's kind of webmin-like and you want to control a FreeBSD box with it, we can now use Agenti. And we have this walkthrough, which will walk you through getting the whole thing set up. It's mostly pretty straightforward, just to give you kind of a heads up. There's a bunch of packages you're going to install. Looks like it's Python-based. The one weird thing is it's not, there's no native package for it yet, so you can't just package install Genti and have it work. So this guide's going to walk you through using the Python pip installer to fetch and get a Genti up and running on the box. But also, which is kind of interesting, is they linked to some pre-built rc.d scripts and example config files, which are hosted up on GitHub. So that's going to further make the process a little easier to get this up and running on a FreeBSD box.
It seems like almost everything's here for someone to make a nice port of this. Hopefully,
it seems like all the hard work's been done.
Somebody will try this out and like it enough and make up a nice port of it.
Yes, please do that. Any porters out there, this may be a good one to do, especially with the rc.d scripts already there and the JSON config files. I mean, sounds like the hard stuff's finished.
And this looks much nicer than Webmin.
It does. It looks kind of cool. I may have to try this out at some point. But, of course, you may not want to serve that publicly. You want everything over SSL. So, as a bonus, he includes instructions on how to set up Nginx with the SSL And of course, that's a must-have if you're planning on doing this over an unsecure network. So this is a pretty complete guide. Take a look at that and get back to us. And of course, if somebody ports this over, we would be pleased to see that as well.
Now, they use a self-signed certificate for the SSL here, but if you combine this with last week's tutorial on using Let's Encrypt, you could have a real certificate.
Speaking of which, I switched over a bunch of my systems to Let's Encrypt yesterday.
Nice.
So I've been very pleased. Then I used the tutorial we talked about last week. She had a cron script up there attached, though, and I ended up hacking the heck out of that because some of the flags were for the old pre-beta version of Let's Encrypt. So some of the flags were wrong there, and the way I set up my authentication was different. But once I hacked it up a little bit, it works perfectly. Nice. It's really cool how that goes. It's surprising how painless it was, especially after using other SSL certs in the past, how difficult it was. This was kind of like run the command, give it your web root directory and what domain you're authenticating, and bam, the certs are all created and done. And renewing them is very easy as well.
So easy you can cron tab it.
Yeah, you can cron tab it, right? It's checking every night and it'll renew them automatically. How slick is that? Okay, well, next up, next year's big conference, we got BSD Can 2016. Yes. The call for papers is already up, which I'm a little sad. They beat the Asia BSD Con call for papers. We got to get that one out, guys. I want to see when that's going to happen too.
But if you subtract the holidays, you only have about a month to get your proposal done. So get that done.
That's right. That's right. So it looks like the acceptance will begin December 1st and it ends January 19th. So if you'd like to talk or want to take a trip to Canada and give a presentation, do try and get a paper written in as soon as possible. And it looks like they should start notifying you of accepted proposals sometime around February 19th is what they're looking at.
So they say they're now accepting proposals for talks. They don't require a full academic or formal paper like Asia BSD Con does. If you want to do that, you're welcome to, but it's not required. Talks will be written with a very strong technical bias. Proposals for business development or marketing type talks are not appreciated or appropriate for this conference, but anything technical is definitely what we want. So personally, what I would like to see is a lot more proposals from first-time submitters this year. I'd like to see a lot more new people.
That's right. That's always
if you do anything interesting with or on a BSD, write a proposal and come tell us about it. Some of the interesting things are, do you have machines that are just bigger than what most people have? Tell us what some of the problems you have are and how you work around them. Or
how about smaller?
Do you have machines that are smaller than any of us will ever believe, right? Have you ported it to run on something that uses vacuum tubes like they showed off at EuroBSDCon? Come tell us about it. Are you running a big farm that does something interesting? We'd love to hear about the issues with that. Doing university research using a BSD, or do you have an idea for a new subsystem or utility? That's what I've talked about recently. Have you suffered through some horrible ordeal? And make sure the rest of us know the best way to get out of it when it happens to us. Come tell us about it. So story time is amazing. Other cool things I've seen is, have you built a radar that runs NetBSD? Have you built a telescope?
Who has?
Have you built a telescope or designed it, the biggest telescope in the world and it's going to be controlled by FreeBSD? Have you run an ISP at the North Pole using FreeBSD jails? That was one of the coolest talks I've ever seen.
Literally, was it cool?
Yes, it was cold.
Oh, sorry.
They had to heat the servers to keep them from freezing.
That's right.
Do you have an ISP, do you have a user group and some tips to share on how to make that go better? Have you combined a bunch of interesting features and tools in a BSD in some new and interesting way? You don't have to have written some code to present here. You just have to show us some cool thing you've done. And if it comes down to there's nothing you can talk about, then teach a tutorial. Do you know how to do something?
Sure.
Even if you're just a sysadmin and you don't do anything interesting, if you know how to do something, you can submit a tutorial. And, there's usually 20 or 30 people that are looking to learn interesting things. They've done IPv6, DNSSEC, how to write man pages, everything. You don't have to be any kind of programmer or sysadmin. If you know how to do something useful, people want to learn. And the best part, if you're selected as a speaker, the conference will arrange your air travel and hotel, and you'll get to spend a few days with the best community on Earth.
That is very true. Very, very true. So you guys need to make an attempt to get out here. and do get those paper submissions done. Don't wait till the last minute because you may forget, holidays come and go and families in town and all that. So do try and get these out as soon as possible. And we would love to bring you guys the list of the talks that are going to be happening here once these all get announced. So hopefully yours will be among those.
Yep. And so if you go to the paper submitting site over at BSDCan, they also have the list of proposals from previous years, so you can kind of see how people wrote the proposal, so you have an idea of which ones get accepted. And also, I'll have to throw a link in there. Michael W. Lucas wrote a blog post last year because he's on the committee that selects people or selects the talks for BSDCan about what they actually look for and some specific things to try to include in that and so on.
Great. Oh, did we mention when it is? What are the dates for it, by the way? The 10th and 11th of June? Looks like, okay. Yep, there we go. Have to mention the date, so put that on your calendar right now that you know.
And plan to get there a couple days early because we actually start with the FreeBSD Developers Summit and so on. Most people, a lot of people are there for the Wednesday and Thursday as well. So you won't want to miss out on extra time with those people.
Okay, folks, so we got BSD bits. We got a lot of stuff there actually this week, and of course a lot of feedback, and of course the image we were teasing you about, something really cool everyone's going to want. But before we get to that, we need to mention the last sponsor this week, which is going to be TarSnap, and of course tarsnap.com/BSDNow, which is very easy to remember. You need to go get signed up, make an account, deposit a few bucks, and start doing your backups properly, fully encrypted, all off-site. Where Colin or nobody on the remote end has access to your data because they don't have the key. Only you do. So, take good care of that key. Print it out even. I love that it has the option to print it, and it's like nicely formatted and stuff. It's all the right size. So make a hard copy of that and put it somewhere safe, your safety deposit box or wherever you want to hide it.
If you lose that, then no one has the key and no one can decrypt your files. Not even you.
For anything secure, that's how it's supposed to be, right? You don't want to trust that some data center somewhere, they won't let anyone in to look at my stuff, because then you find out a week later they got hacked or something, or an employee went off the reservation, and that kind of stuff's not good. That's not going to happen with TarSnap, though. TarSnap takes their security seriously, and of course they back that up. They release all the source code, so you can audit and make sure it's doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. And then if you don't want to use a pre-built binary, because let's be honest, if you're that paranoid, you should compile it from source. They allow you to do that as well. So you can always compile TarSnap yourself if you'd like to. And of course, that's made very easy up on the website. There's instructions. It's not too difficult to do. I think that's even in the port tree. Does it compile it from source? I think for FreeBSD. Yeah. So just go run make on that. And there you go. You build your own binary. But of course, guys, TarSnap gets set up today. And I forget how much pico dollars per byte month is it?
It's
right
250
now?
pico dollars per byte month, which is 25 cents per gigabyte per month.
Wow. Yeah. Dirt cheap. So you're not going to spend very much on there, especially if you're a home user just backing up small amounts of data, since it's only going to back up the bits that have changed. Okay, Alan. So what's our first BSD bits this week? We got, I guess, OpenBSD's HTTP server that we had talked about in the past. It looks like that's landed in the FreeBSD ports tree now. So we have another alternative HTTP server, which is pretty cool. I may have to play with this one. I have a few things where even Nginx might be too heavy for that. I don't need too many features in it. So that could be really cool.
And it automatically depends on LibreSSL.
Oh, even better. Even better. I like that. Okay. Well, we have Stephen Bourne's New York City bug talk is online. We had mentioned that was happening, and we have a link to the YouTube video now. So after you're done here, if you'd like to go watch Stephen Bourne, you may have to take a look and grab that link. And let's see, next up here we have the FreeBSD Wiki. I know there's been a lot of times I've been Google searching and I've run across the FreeBSD Wiki where there's enough useful information there that it's been really helpful in the past. Looks like they're looking for a new owner for that site. So if that's something you'd like to do, maybe you're not a developer, but you can help administrate a wiki page, go ahead and take a look over there, see if that's something you can get involved and help the community out with.
Yeah, there's a lot of useful information in there, and it'd be great to have that keep being maintained.
Yeah, that needs to keep on going. And next up, we have an OpenBSD mail server. We got a how-to on how to set that up as well. We didn't get to that in the stories today, but there's still some useful information here. So if you're looking for how to set that up properly, maybe just your first time, take a look at the link we'll have in the show notes here.
I love the machine they're running on a Sun Netra T1 with 512 megabytes of RAM and a pair of 16 gigabyte hard drives.
Because why not?
That'll work. Although, you could also apply the same to a DigitalOcean Droplet or any other VM that's be about the same size.
Nice. Okay, so what's this new Magic GetOpt library? What's going on there?
Right. So if you're writing a program in C and you want to do GetOpts to handle command line flags, you usually either you use GetOpt, which only allows the single letter flags, or you have to use longopt, which allows you to have the -- word type ones. But that one usually, if you're trying to mix the two or something, it can get really kind of annoying. You're either doing long ops where for each long one, you just specify that there's also this short one. But then if you have a lot of options, it doesn't really work. And the code can get really messy. You end up with like these. And the biggest thing is that you end up with one set of definitions that probably ends up in a .h file over here. And then the code that actually processes over here. And so every time you want to add a new flag, you have to edit like 4 different blocks of code that are possibly in different files. And, you end up with pretty ugly looking code sometimes. On the other hand, with Colin's new Magic GetOpt, you write something that looks very much like the plain GetOpt, the most simple form of it. But for each case statement, basically, you put GetOpt, updarg, and then your short or long flag or whatever you want to do, and it handles all the magic for you using macros.
Nice.
So you end up with you end up with a nice short little list here, and you get everything you want all put into your code.
Well, next time I have to do some more C. That may be something I'll try out.
Yeah, I think I'll be converting my UCL CMD stuff to use this because it will save me so much headache.
Yeah, that looks a lot nicer. Okay, well, next up we have a link here, Pixie booting OpenBSD from an OpenWRT. So if you have some of those lying around, you'd like to throw OpenBSD on there, set that up as your router, take a look. We got a link to show you how to get that set up.
Yeah, it's
and then
that's a firmware that a lot of people have on a router, and so it's great to be able to do that.
That's right. And last but not least, we have a link to a mailing list post. You're talking about supporting the OpenBSD project. And yes, it is important to keep buying those CD sets because that's what goes to help Theo directly in running that very power-hungry basement, I believe.
Yes, with all the builds happen and so on. And specifically, this post basically contains quite a few clarifications about, if you donate to the FreeBSD or the OpenBSD Foundation, certain money goes to certain things, but that doesn't go to Theo. The entire point of having the OpenBSD Foundation was to satisfy certain people's concerns that all the money wasn't just going to Theo. So none of that money goes to Theo. And so if you're ever interested in exactly how all that works, then this post is great. He also mentions that, the OpenBSD Foundation, like the FreeBSD Foundation, posts all their books open online. You can see all the money they got and exactly how they spent it. So, you can be sure it's going where it should.
Okay. Great. Well, let's see. Now we got feedback and questions here. So first up this week is going to be Zachary, who's asking about a FreeBSD isolated jails. He says, "Hey guys, love the show. You switched me from Linux to BSD and now I need some help. I've been a longtime Linux user, but with the recent drama in the community, I was looking for sanctuary. I've been listening to the podcast for a while now. What really won me over to FreeBSD was jails, ZFS, and that the entire operating system was developed together, unlike the Linux community, which just builds the kernel and finds a new shiny way to manage packages, do updates, etc. Seemed a lot of wasted effort. Anyway, I'm currently working on a project where we'd like to isolate several different web applications from each other that share a common database. Would it be possible to isolate each web application into a jail with a connection to the host or to another jail running MySQL? If so, how would I go about doing it? Also, would there be a way to route subdomains to different jails? For example, I have app1.example.com and app2.example.com. Could I use NAT rules in PF for something to route API.example1 to one jail and then, of course, the second to a different jail? Forgive my ignorance here, as this is a whole new paradigm for me. A coworker suggested Docker, but I'd rather use something designed with security in mind from the get-go and not just as an afterthought. Thanks for the help, guys. Keep up the great show." He said also, "P.S. Love the return of the Cantrill episode. The guy makes me want to get into OS development. Maybe I'll start with a port or something." Hey, well, we mentioned a port earlier in the episode. Yeah, do that one first.
Exactly.
There you go.
So for the jails, there's a couple things. For routing, yes, you can run each of your web apps in a separate jail. and then you can have a separate jail for your database, and then the jails for the web app will just connect to the jail for the database via its IP address, and you can use an internal set of IP addresses so that that communication never leaves your machine.
Sure.
So that'll work for that. Then about routing, request to app 1 and app 2 to the different jails. PF can't do that based on what URL the user went to, because that's an application level thing, and PF is lower level than that. If you have separate IP addresses, then you can do it that way. Your other option is basically on the host, or better, in an even separate jail.
Another jail.
Yeah, in another jail, you run Nginx or the OpenBSD HTTPD or something like that, and you set up the different vhost entries for app 1 and app 2, and then you just use the proxy command in Nginx, or I don't know what it is in OpenBSD's thing, but it would be similar, and you just route it to the IP address of app 1 jail and app 2 jail, and then that one, your web server jail, will then route to your different application jails. We do something kind of similar at Scale Engine for our, one of our apps is our control panel. It comes into a pair of Nginxs that are carved together, and then there's a pool of app jails, one on each of 5 different machines, and we kind of load balance across those. So you can also have your app be on multiple machines in different jails and do it that way as well. But yeah, you can take the request in on one IP address and route them to the different jails, but it'll have to be done with basically a layer 7 load balancer like Nginx or the OpenBSD or RelayD or something like that, rather than done at PF, because PF is only looking at like IP addresses and port numbers. It doesn't know, inside that encrypted packet that there's this host name on it.
Yeah, that's a handy way to do it. That's how we do all our Jenkins setup here. We have all these different nodes and a whole bunch of different jails for different things, and then the one front-end web server that just runs proxy, so we're not exposing all those out.
Yep.
Definitely, that should work for you. So let us know how that works on your end, and if you have any problems, of course, send us some feedback. Okay, next up we have Robert, who has a question here about IO cage. He said, on the PCBSD forums, we're trying to work out the simplest solution to connecting to an IO cage created jail to the host that you created on and a local network or the internet. He said there's very little articulate step-by-step and detailed docs that exist on this, either at FreeBSD, PCBSD, or the IOCage GitHub site as of yet. He said, I was wondering if you could just work out a presentation to illustrate this procedure for a simple use case. Just create the jail and its network connection, simple network with a modem router DHCP IP address assigned by the router, SSH from the host to the jail to the host, jail to the network, network to the jail, and most importantly, internet to the jail. So there's a lot of tutorials out there on how to do this. It may not be IO cage specific.
Yeah, so there's lots for like regular jails and easy jail and so on. For your most basic one, if you just assign the jail an IP address that's in the same subnet that your DHCP server would give out but isn't, then it should all just work.
It just shows up. Yeah, that's how
your host will be able to talk to the jail, and the jail to the host. That'll work fine. The jail will be over to the network because it just has another IP address and looks like it's on the network. And the network to the jail. Then because it'll inherit the routing table from your host machine, that IP address will be able to go out to the internet from your router. And then on your router, you would just have to configure the port forwarding to say, this is the port I want to SSH to, and it'll be routed to that IP address, and that'll work. Also, if you use the vimage system, tell IOCage to create a vimage jail, then the jail will have its own complete networking stack, and you can just run a DHCP client and get your router to give it its own IP address. And that works as well.
And that'll work the same way.
In a fancier configuration where your machine has an internet IP address, and so you can't have multiple IP addresses, one for the jail and one for the host kind of thing, then you would have to set up NAT, and that's actually a much more complicated setup. But on one where you're, running the jail on a machine that's just behind the regular modem router that gives DHCP, then it's really super easy.
Yeah, I've done that like with my DigitalOcean droplet and only had one IP, right? So it's just a few lines in PF to set up and say, I want to forward these ports over, and all of a sudden now these jails are accessible, or the services in them are. So hopefully you can find some docs which will allow you to do that. Don't be scared of the IO cage stuff. Just man IO cage will show you most of how that works. But if you set it up the way Alan described, either one of those scenarios should get exactly what you're looking to do here. Okay, next up we have I'm not sure how to pronounce this, but Kajel or Kell, or however, I'm sorry for mispronouncing that, but he writes in about server management. He says, "Hi again, guys. I have a fairly open question regarding server management. I have 2 to 3 BSD servers, mostly free and one open. I have always made sure that these servers can send me email so I can keep track of what's going on. However, it's getting fairly annoying, and I end up with email filters just to tag and store all the daily emails away in a folder." Yeah, I can empathize with that. He said, "I know there are better ways to do this, so my question to you guys is, how do you solve this? I'm guessing a central log server, maybe some monitoring tools, maybe Nagios, etc. So what would we recommend for that? What do you do, Alan? I assume Nagios?
So
Is
I
that what you
use
do?
Nagios. Dan in the chat room has looked at this system we've covered on the show before called Elk, which is like Elastic Store or Elasticsearch, Logstash, and something else. I forget what the other one's called. But it basically gives you a kind of central database where you can search the logs from all your machines and do interesting things. That was
Oh, great log.
That's not the one I was thinking of, but that might be
Oh.
another thing that is interesting. You can
Okay.
look that one up. I'd never heard of it before.
Mhm.
Kibana is the K in Elk. It's
Okay.
Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana. Lots of people say it's good. I've never tried it, but I trust the people that say it's good.
Okay.
But yeah, so I use Nagios and I get lots of email.
Right. I think we all get a lot of
Yeah.
email. Okay, so Brian next writes in about migrating data. He says, "My current home file server has a pair of 2 terabyte drives and a mirror, 2 terabytes usable space, less than a single terabyte in use. I want to replace that with a FreeNAS Mini. I currently can't afford to buy more larger drives, so I want to reuse the 2 terabyte drives. I do have access to 4 500 gig drives, and I want to replace this with the FreeNAS Mini and the 500 gig drives and a stripe of mirrors, like the kind I hear about you speak on TextNow. Once I move my data off of the 2 terabyte drives, I'll erase them and store them till I can afford to buy 2 more 2 terabyte drives, and then replace each of the 500 gig drives one at a time after it resilvers. Does this make sense to do?"
Right. When I first heard this, I was like, well, why wouldn't you just keep using the two terabyte drives? But I'm guessing his problem is he needs to store the data, right? And technically, the 500 gig drives will probably give him slightly better speed because you have more spindles and more heads to use at once. So yeah, you could just set up the 4 drives as basically 2 mirrors of 2 drives, and then that will give you lots and lots of read speed and pretty good write speed. And then you can copy your data over. And then you would, I guess, just shelve the two terabyte drives for now, and then when you have more, replace one 500 gig drive at a time until you've replaced all 4, and then you will have your 4 terabytes of usable space instead of 2.
Okay.
That's
Should be pretty
yeah,
straightforward.
that should be pretty straightforward. If your 2 terabyte drives were empty, you could just set them up as a ZFS mirror, or it's not optimal, but you could do one mirror of 2 terabyte drives and one mirror of 500 gig drives. But I don't know that that's probably not the best idea. So
Okay. Next up, we have Mike, who's following up about our Radius question we had last week. He said, "I had set up a full Radius server for Hotspots Wi-Fi. I'm sure it's easy enough to integrate with PAM, although I'm not a PAM ninja." He said, "To get Radius working, there's a lot of moving pieces, so you're going to need to read GNU Radius." He said, "The best book ever," which turned me into a pro on it. He said, "Once you have your server and auth running with test users, you can run rad test. Be sure to set up all your attributes. Start with SQL-based auth. Aside from having your server running with shared simple secret, you're golden." He said, "Until then, you can try harder, bang louder, and it will not work. Set up your user attributes." He said, "Auth is easy, accounting is simple to add, and good luck with it." So if it doesn't help, he says you may have to post some more elsewhere.
yeah, so hopefully that will help. I think we had 1 or 2 users write in asking about getting Radius set up. And as far as the PAM part goes, I know that a certain popular BSD author person is starting work on a new book about PAM. So hopefully, everybody will be a PAM ninja soon enough.
Nice. Okay, well, we teased you guys with it for a bit, but here's the picture we got. Alan will get that queued up. But he says, from Lazio, "Hello, might be a little bit off topic, but Christmas is here, and what could be better than a stocking to hang on the fireplace than a beastie stocking? I have to admit it was my wife's idea, and it was also sewn by herself. I think it's neat, and it is my perfect free BSD Christmas present. I wish a Merry Christmas to you guys and every listener out there." from Laszlo, and you can show the picture there,
Yes.
Alan.
I now want that.
Yeah, I want one too. That's
Yeah.
really cool. I need a whole set of those. I got 5 kids, man. We'll have 7 of those in a row. That's gonna be really awesome. But I'm torn between that or the Star Wars ones.
Yeah.
You know.
Star Wars is just
Very
a fad.
cool, guys. Oh yeah. That's right. Hey, people are already lining up. You guys are lucky I'm here this
Yeah, I
week.
know. Craziness.
Anyway, well, great. Thank you so much for sending that picture, and Laszlo. That made my morning when I saw
Yes.
that. That was very cool. Very, very cool. So as we close out the show, guys, we do want to remind you, try and send in your questions, comments. If you have any show ideas or topics, or you find a story out there, we really do appreciate when you mail those in, because a lot of times we include those in next week's episode. So send those to feedback@bsdnow.tv. That's the only email we monitor, so please do try send things there. We may not reply to you right away, or if at all. Sometimes we'll just wait and sit on it and then talk about it next week in next week's episode. So you'll have to come back and see if we read your question or if we used the story you sent in. But we do appreciate everything you guys send there, and we do monitor that. So please keep sending stuff there, and we appreciate it. Of course, if there's something you want us to interview somebody about, send that in as well. We'll try and hunt them down and get that scheduled.
We do need more interviews, so if you have any ideas or can make an introduction to somebody that we would like to interview, that'd be great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we would definitely appreciate that. But thank you guys so much for watching this week, and we'll look forward to talking to you same time next.